Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. We're going to talk about club liability tonight and how you can avoid liabilities. And we have with us 4 speakers who are going to be our sort of panel, and we're going to let you ask questions as we go along. Lindsey's going to have to leave about 6:20, so I'm going to ask him to start, and be sure to ask questions that you have for Lindsey before he has to leave at 6:20. Okay. So, Lindsey Morris, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
So I think the best thing to do is the Rotary insurance broker for Rotary International has put together some frequently asked questions that I would love to share with the club, with everyone, certainly on this call. But I think one of the things I want to highlight is, being in the insurance business as long as I've been in it, what I typically look at when I look at an insurance policy, I look at what's excluded. I sort of work backwards, not what's covered. Tell me what's excluded first, and then I'll figure out. So what is not covered as of right now, and I've heard some rumblings that things might change, but so accidents, right? So we had that horrific accident at the golf tournament where one of the members was riding on the golf cart and unfortunately fell off and eventually passed away. So as of right now, nothing to do with accidents for volunteers or club members who are injured while working on behalf of a club are covered. So I kind of think that is something right now Rotary International has asked this broker to look at and see whether they can cover it. There are accident policies out there. As I was driving home for the office today, I'm thinking, well, maybe our district can put together sort of a group accident policy for all the clubs. So that's something to think about, because unfortunately people can get hurt and do get hurt at events. That's what accidents are about. Bonds. So that's another thing. I don't know if most clubs, I know Framingham does, but we have a surety bond, a crime bond that protects us in case, the treasurer or the president decides to, take funds that don't belong to them and use them for personal reasons. So it is a sort of a prudent decision that most clubs should think about making about buying. We're not talking about a lot of money, a couple $100 for a fidelity bond, but it is something that they should do. This policy, interestingly enough, does not cover cyber risk, which is, I can't believe it, but they don't. So that's again something maybe the district can look at a cyber policy to cover, information that may get into the wrong hands about members, guests at events. Cyber has tremendous exposure across the board. Event cancellation insurance, that's a specific thing that could be purchased if there's an event that's being planned that unfortunately a club has to come up with a deposit and they risk that deposit if the event has to get canceled. So that can be a specific thing by club, by event. Property insurance. So if the club has any personal property, what do we have? We just bought ourselves a personal computer. We have some speakers. We have a screen. I don't know, maybe we got a couple $1,000 worth of personal property. We right now don't cover it. But it is something that depending on the club, they might want to think about it. And then they mentioned travel insurance, which again, I'm not so sure that we're going to worry about that, but they did want to mention it. So, not that I want to necessarily start this discussion out on a negative vein in terms of exclusions, but sometimes that's a good way to start a discussion. So I don't know if anyone has some specific questions about insurance and how it affects their club.
Lindsay, you made a comment at the very beginning that the exclusion for accidents extends to members and volunteers. So does
Yes.
that mean if we have an event and we have a non-Rotarian volunteering at that event in some capacity on behalf of the club, they're not covered?
Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Correct. And I think, I just saw an email come through from someone. Oh, no, it wasn't an email. Actually, I searched online and obviously this is affecting clubs across the country. And one of the clubs, one of the districts, and I forget where it was from, was making a comment like they thought that the Rotary International is revisiting this. And I do think this is something that they should cover. I don't think I think the exposure is there. I think the fact that they're not covering it is not good. We as a district might want to think about, can I put together some form of an accident policy on a group basis that could be less expensive than going out and purchasing on your own? I can explore that. And what I would do there is make sure, that accidents are covered for not just Rotarians, but volunteers.
Cheryl?
Would members of the general public be covered? For example, if we're having a masquerade ball to raise money for something, we sell tickets, but would members of the general, and something happened to a member of
Yes,
the
they would
public,
be, yeah,
that
they would be,
members of the general public are covered. Okay,
right.
thank
right.
you. That
Attendees at our events. I know that Weston Wayland purchased extra insurance when they had their dog day because they felt that the risk was fairly good that something might happen.
Right, if a dog bit someone, sure. It's just an
Okay.
accident, sure.
Paula?
What does the insurance cover? I'm just,
Well, it covers a lot of things. Let me see if I can sort of talk to you about what does it actually cover. Let's go here. So obviously it gets into what's covered. Rotary clubs are covered, Rotary districts, Rotary club foundations, Rotary district foundations, Interact clubs, Rotaract clubs, Rotary community corps, certified youth exchange organizations such as RILA, president-elect training seminars, and it says other Rotary organizations as on file with Rotary International Risk Manager. But let's talk about coverage. It does provide general liability, and that general liability is more third party. So if someone was to be injured or property was damaged, that is considered third party, someone else, that's covered. Okay. Liquor liability, it does extend if you serve liquor at an event. And let's say the club decides that they're going to do it by themselves. They don't hire someone. They have to make sure they obtain a liquor license from the city or town for that event. If you do not obtain that, you have no liquor liability. Now, it would be my recommendation that if you're having some form of a catered affair, I would push that exposure off to the caterer, who typically not just has liability insurance for what they're doing, but also liquor liability if they're going to serve the liquor, because they would also have someone trained in serving liquor properly, making sure someone is the correct age to be able to, enjoy a drink. So that's something that is covered, but there's a restriction.
I think Al had a question too.
Go ahead.
Al, you're muted.
Yeah, Lindsay, I have a question. I think I heard through the grapevine that for every event we have to have a separate insurance policy for it, for the same one.
Depending on what the event is, right,
Mhm.
and what the exposure is, you may be right. Because as I see this, where there's an exclusion for events where Rotarians or volunteers for the event, for the Rotary Club are not covered, yeah, that's
Okay.
something, and that's, I just, for just a few minutes ago, I was talking to Elliot about that. I think that's something that I'm hoping RI is revisiting that, but we as a district I can start to visit that as a district-wide accident policy. Even if we charge, we'll have to figure out how that gets charged to each club and so forth.
Lindsay, when we have an event at a hotel or another facility, they often ask for a binder.
Yes.
What is a binder and why do we need it?
Yeah, so the binder is evidence that the Rotary Club has insurance for the event.
Mhm.
There is a way in which to request it. I can send out the email address that is used to request a certificate of insurance. It's actually not a binder, but a certificate. So a certificate basically is a way to prove you have certain coverages to someone else. And that someone else may also require to be named as additional insured. Some of these venues have gotten a lot more sophisticated, have a lot more requirements. So you have to look at that too.
We serve alcohol at an event, for instance, Pels or district conference or anything like that. We typically host a hospitality suite.
Yes.
Normally, if it's a cocktail hour, the hotel will host it with their bartenders and liability
Yes.
and on them. However,
Correct.
when it comes to a hospitality suite,
Mhm.
it's our serving of the alcohol. So are you
Yes.
suggesting we add or get a liquor license if we plan on doing a hospitality suite?
I don't know if the city or town requires it under that type of scenario. But I would say again that it wouldn't be a bad idea to have some form of liquor liability. God forbid someone leaves that event, they've had one too many drinks and gets into a serious car accident and someone gets killed. Then what? Everyone is going to get sued. Everyone.
Thank you.
Paula?
So kind of following up on what Al's question. So what constitutes an event? Like we have events like bigger fundraising events, but also does that apply to things like we're participating in Trunk or Treat that's run by the Chamber of Commerce? Is that an event? It's not our event. We're just going to the event. Other little things, smaller, like volunteer things while we might be cleaning up a park. Do we need to do that? Get insurance for that? Do we need an insurance for every single thing we do?
Right. They don't get into how they define what they mean by an event. But you raise a good point. I mean, we serve once a month, we serve food at the United Way, Pearl Street Cafe in Framingham. What happens if someone gets hurt? That's another example, right? So I'm going to have to dig into that to be able to answer that question more accurately as to what really defines what they mean by an event. And then at what point, if we get this accident policy, how would it apply to all these types of events?
I think Cheryl had a question.
If you're not selling the alcohol, then you wouldn't have a license for it. Need a license for it in most towns if you're just hosting a gathering. But what you're saying is you would be worried about because it doesn't cover the members or the volunteers. Is that correct? Is that what I understand?
No, not necessarily. What I want to find out again under this coverage for liquor. Let me see if I can go to this for a second.
For example, we recently held a carnival where we had a beer tent, a beer garden, and sold tickets for beers. And we had license from the town to do it, but we were relying on the insurance from Rotary to cover us for other things.
Right. Well, it would have actually covered you for the liquor too, based
Okay,
on
good.
based on that scenario. But your other scenario, and that is, serving it where you're not charging, the city or town doesn't require a permit. I mean, this happens all the time. I know that.
But it still wouldn't cover members or volunteers. Is that the case? Is that the concern and why we might want to have a separate insurance policy?
Yeah. So again, because I'm reading these things and they're not the actual insurance policies, these are sort of abbreviated versions of things. What I would tell you about that is I have to find out how that liquor liability applies to their accident exclusion. Right? How would it apply?
So,
Okay.
so some of these questions we may need to ask Lindsey to help us research. And he has agreed to be the insurance representative for the district. So he's our district resource here. And we're all kind of learning this as we go along. Lynn, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. Regarding the conversation around the hospitality suite or I guess any event, would you recommend having a waiver that people sign? Would that do anything to help cover or no?
Do we have any attorneys online right now? Any attorneys? Yes, no? No
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So-
Let the
so-
attorney answer that one.
I mean, this isn't really my area, but I would say a waiver would apply to the person waiving their rights, maybe. But certainly somebody else who might be injured
Correct.
by, somebody who's had too much alcohol, they're not going to be covered at all by any waiver. And it's even questionable in some instances, whether a waiver really sticks. So
Right.
I think it's better if Lindsey checks out like the limits of the coverage for accidents.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. Waivers most times don't. It's like the back of a ski ticket, right? You look at the back of your ski ticket, they want to tell you they're not responsible for anything. Well, in actuality, they are. If you get hurt on that ski slope, they're responsible.
One more question.
I'm still
Sure, anyone?
muted if it's okay. I was going to ask, where would we view what is covered?
So what I can do is provide this summary of summary of coverages. Joyce, do you want me to send it to you and you'll send it out to the?
Yes, I'll put it in the handout set. We'll have a handout set that goes with the
okay,
video,
so
and
that
distributing
right.
to everyone.
So right, so I will do that, and then they put together these frequently asked questions, which are very good. I'll put that in too. So those are two, I think, pretty handy documents to have.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Well, I hope I answered more questions than than not, but it is something I think we as a district, need to look at a few things and and hope maybe Rotary International, realizes they have to fill some holes here.
Right.
So,
it is a discussion that's coming up in multiple clubs all over the place.
oh, yeah, I'm sure. Yep. Okay. Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you,
Okay, bye
Lindsey.
now. Okay, bye now.
Bye.
So I asked Paula to put together some things to think about when we're taking pictures at our events. So Paula?
Yeah, the good news is this is way simpler than the whole insurance thing. way simpler. I actually made some slides and they're kind of a little bit repetitive, but
Sure, go ahead.
I like to repeat things so I'll remember. So here we go. So the question that Joyce had posed was, how can we protect our club from liability in using pictures of attendees at our events? So it kind of all boils down to, in Massachusetts, when you're taking photos of children, it's important to follow specific guidelines to ensure legal compliance and respect for privacy. So you need to get permission from the parents or guardians of children if you're going to be taking photos of them. Just full stop, that's it. Let me see. Okay, so when taking photos of children, you need to get explicit consent, and that means in writing. Just verbally is not really legally considered enough. And then when you're getting consent, you should clearly state what the photos are going to be used for. Like, are they going to be used in social media, on the website, or for promotional, whatever way you're going to be using them, you should state that up front. If you're just using the photos for kind of documenting purposes, for internal use, then it might be okay just to get verbal consent. But that's kind of up to you to figure that out. But in general, it's probably best to go with a photo consent form. And I actually looked to see if Rotary had a specific form to get consent, and they don't, because every state has different rules. So I just looked up at the Massachusetts rules. So one thing about, another thing to note is actually respecting privacy. Don't use photos that make people look bad or embarrassing. It might be cute for, getting a photo of a kid that looks in distress, but it's really not a good idea. And I mentioned that about, the forms, you want to explicitly state what the photos are going to potentially be used for. So here's some things you can do. You could get written consent at registration if you have events. Like, we have an event coming up, our winter community breakfast in December, and we will have to get written consent at registration. Or when they're purchasing tickets, it could be like a checkbox, I agree to this, or I don't agree to this. Even when you get written consent, it's a good policy in general to ask the parents or guardians if they're okay with you using the photos. I mean, we haven't really had any instances where people were really, no, I don't want that, but you really need to make sure. And in the case of when you can't really tell who the kid is, if it's the back of their heads, then it's generally okay. You don't need to do, you don't need to worry too much about it. But if it's, an individual photo of their face close up, then you really need to be, get the permission. So one thing we do at our event, and I think Joyce might have, can speak to this too. We've had events saying as soon as people walk in the door, it says something like, smile, you're on camera, photos will be taken at this event and it's going to be used for promotional purposes. If you don't want your photo taken, please let us know. And we have people wear a big orange sticker, like a circle dot kind of thing, so they're identifiable by the photographers as they wander around. I think Joyce told me that in an event that her club did, they used wristbands, different colored wristbands for people. So there's different ways of doing that. Oh yeah, okay, so consent indicators, that's, the sticker, and something that's noticeable is the key for that. So for digital and print media use, ensure your photo release form covers the potential uses of the photo, including social media, the website, print materials, and if you're doing something for local media, if it's the TV station or the local online newspaper, because who has a newspaper anymore? I don't think very few towns have local newspapers. And that's just for personal use, but if you're doing third-party usage, you also have to make sure that you cover that too. And here is an example of just a very simple consent form. It's not complicated. You can just, it's easily Googleable, just, photo consent form. I actually just put in Massachusetts. This is just an example of what you can do. And Joyce is going to be sending these slides out at the end of this. So, there you go.
Great. Questions? Brookline recently had its dog day, and we did have people sign consent forms as they entered. And if they did not want to be photographed, then they got an orange wristband, and the people who did consent got a green wristband. So again, so the photographer can tell. And even if they accidentally shoot one, then we can see in the picture that this was not an okay. We do have one social worker who really, really does not want her picture taken, period. And we've also had divorce cases or cases of abuse where it's important that the child not be identifiable in the picture. So
yeah, that's always very important to be aware of that.
Yeah, Cheryl?
So we do a Christmas tree lighting and it's coming up on December 1st, where we always take pictures of Santa surrounded by a huge group of kids. I mean, it's a huge, we're taking.
Well,
pictures by
in
30,
public
40
places,
kids.
yeah, in public places, there's no, concept of privacy, but specifically with children, you are supposed to get permission. Like if you take a picture, you should go to that crowd and say, I'm going to, and I want to use this photo, and can I get, at least a verbal permission? But that's public, which is different from a private event that people are paying.
I see, because it's in the common, but the pictures we take usually have 30 or 40 children in them. Adults
Yeah,
too.
but that's legally, you're supposed to you're not
their
supposed
permission.
to just take pictures
Okay.
of kids.
So if you make that announcement that you're taking this picture, it's going to be used in media, then hopefully the parent will go grab the kid out of there if they're really passionate about not being photographed.
Their hats are on, their mittens are on, their coats are up. It's hard to tell who is who, but we can just avoid, we'll take a picture when they're all facing Santa while we're facing Santa, so we'll all get the backs of their heads.
Yeah,
that could work.
that's totally, that's a really good option. And I try to do that at events, is like get ones where, Santa, obviously he's fair game. And actually anybody over the age of 18 is fair game. But kids, you really need to be very careful. So if you can just angle it so you can take pictures of the back of their heads or whatever, where their faces are obscured, that's fine. Sharon, you had your hand up?
Yeah, so when we volunteer at the Boys and Girls Club in Maynard, I always just take pictures of the volunteers and say we have a bounce house. You still get a feeling of what the event was and how meaningful it was. I really don't think we need pictures of the kids, to get the point across of what we're doing.
Yeah, good point.
Johnny?
So a couple things. One, with RILA, I think we have a clause on the application form for our parents to sign off saying, I approve, pictures being taken, blah, blah, blah. My guess is if the student themselves decides, I don't want my picture taken, they can tell us afterwards, but we've done our due diligence at the beginning. Another thing I've seen at different events is there's a sign when you first enter saying, by entering this premises, you're agreeing to be photographed for whatever purposes. Do you think that would be something easier on clubs that covers liability?
Yeah, it, like I said earlier, that's a good warning, but it actually isn't completely complying with the letter of the law.
Gotcha.
So the easiest way around that is then if you have photos, go get the, permission after the fact, just before you use them.
Okay.
If it's just too much trouble to try and get, but we have always done it that way. Just say, you're going to get your picture taken. Let us know if you don't want it, because that's advance warning. But technically, legally, you're supposed to get consent from parents. And like you said, for Ryla, all schools, all recreation department, any of those kind of, any organization that works with kids, that's always done. Well, that's the first thing that gets signed off on. Like the parents are asked if they, agree to this. And there can be a few kids who just opt out for like a wide variety of reasons, like Joyce mentioned, but the vast majority, people seem to be okay with it now.
I do know if we don't have a district release form, we could create one. I know we have one for work whenever we do different events, but I do think it would be a good idea to have at least a staple form
Right.
everyone in the district can just download and copy.
Yeah, so I did a sample one there, and that could be used as the basis, for starting off if he wanted to do that.
Right. Obviously, it's too awkward to always be running around with your clipboard and taking pictures and asking for permissions on the fly. If there's a particularly good picture that does have a full face of a kid, you probably do want to go up and make sure you have the name of the kid that you're going to put in the paper, and the timestamp maybe on your phone when you took the picture. It's kind of hard linking up the photo with the kid after the fact. Paula?
Yeah, I have, the way I've gotten around that is I'll use people that I know. I'll just go, oh, here's, Nikki and her kids. Great. That's good. Or, club members' kids or grandkids, just because for that very reason, because it's hard to track a million, we have several hundred coming, and that's like a really difficult proposition, but technically that's what Massachusetts regulations say, that you were supposed to get
Thank you.
permission, written.
One quick comment, the exchange students who come in have already signed, they and their parents have already signed consent to use images for Rotary related events. So just FYI for that.
Great, and there's a perfect segue. We can ask Jeannie Raymond, who's one of the people on our committee for the exchange students, to tell us a little bit about the insurance aspects for exchange students.
So I'm not going to talk only about about all of the types of insurance that the inbound exchange students have when they come here. First of all, they come with it's mandatory when any exchange student that's coming to District 7910 comes through ESSEX, which stands for Eastern States Student Exchange. Eastern States Student Exchange is an entity that is one of the named insureds. It's one of the certified entities that's covered under Rotary International, just like a Rotary Club or a district. And as part of that, it's mandatory that they purchase insurance through an insurance company called CISI Bolduc, and all of the exchange students have to buy that. The students coming into the US and the outbound students that go out. And that comes with $1 million of medical expense insurance. It's both really a medical insurance policy as well as a travel insurance policy. There's accidental death. There's sports coverage if they are injured playing sports. And it does include mental health coverage, including like if they needed to go home, and even if they needed somebody with them, when they go home, there is coverage for something like that for the parent or another adult to go with them. There's trip interruption insurance if they had to unexpectedly stay overnight someplace. Family reunion, there is coverage if a close family member in their home country, passed away or became very sick, they are allowed to go back, and the insurance covers something like that. Something that it also covers is personal liability. So if the exchange student does something and it damages property, or they hurt somebody, or they're not allowed to drive while they're here, but if they, got in a car and had an accident and hurt somebody, there is personal liability insurance that would probably kick in, as well as the auto insurance that, the owner of the car had. So that's something to consider. So they're pretty well insured when they come here. And this is just some of the coverages that the CISI Bulldog insurance has. Then, without regard to insurance, there are a bunch of risk mitigation strategies that all of the students and volunteers with the program are required to learn about, primarily youth protection. So every volunteer in the youth exchange program has to take a course and on youth protection. Every adult member in a host family, 18 and over, has to learn about Rotary International's youth protection policy. And there are background checks too for every host family, as well as all of us who volunteer for the youth exchange program. If there is an incident involving, and I'll talk about this again in the next slide, but if there is an incident involving an allegation or a claim of sexual misconduct, we should report that right away to Rotary International. And the person to talk to first would be Jane Schroeder. She's the district chair. But I talk to her almost every day. So if you were to reach out to me, it would get to Jane right away too. Okay, how does the Rotary International liability insurance coverage fit in? So as I mentioned, Eastern State Student Exchange, ESSEX, is a certified youth exchange organization, and it is an insured entity. Now, occasionally, some other, independent club or person will reach out to Jane or some other Rotarian and ask about an independent exchange, not through ESSEX. So we cannot do an exchange independently outside of ESSEX. Any liability insurance coverage would not cover that. Okay, so it does have to go through ESSEX. So that's the only entity that we exchange with. So I've had emails, for example, from India, you may get them. The liability insurance, just like it does for clubs, does cover some things that Rotarians or volunteers do while they're acting in their roles as youth exchange volunteers. The one thing that Lindsey didn't mention, but that it is part of, there are two things that are important, that is part of the existing liability insurance coverage, is there is a sexual misconduct liability coverage that is part of Rotary International's policy. And so if there was a claim against a Rotarian or a host family member or even somebody else, the Rotary International policy would come into play. And equally as important, it also would provide for the defense. So that would be important if there was an allegation and lawyers were needed. And that applies if the allegation of sexual misconduct was against an older person, or if it was against if it was from somebody, a non-Rotarian, against the exchange student. So it would apply equally. And that's, if you want more information, and this will be shared, you can, reach out to Jane Schroeder or me. There is a youth protection guide. Probably the folks who do RILA all the time are familiar with the youth protection guide. Essex also provides, youth protection policy that we share and go over thoroughly with the students themselves. And then you can see like the CISI Bolduc medical insurance online as well. So any questions about hosting or you're getting your club involved in youth exchange?
Ralph Hammond has his hand up. You want to take down the slide?
Okay. Yeah.
My wife and I hosted an exchange student, and you just mentioned that Bolduc insurance policy. She needed medical attention. I don't know, she had the flu or something went around. We brought her to the doctors, and I said, oh, gee, I'm going to have paying this bill. I wasn't even a Rotarian then. And just sent it to the district and was all covered. There were no questions whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah, it should be. It should be covered. So the only thing that it's not covered, and we tell the students before they arrive, they can buy a higher level policy if there is a question about a coverage for a pre-existing condition. In general, that's not covered. So if they needed immunizations once they got here, those they would need to pay out of pocket. But hopefully they get all those before they leave. And also there is, if somebody comes, like perhaps they're diabetic and they come, they can actually purchase another level of insurance that would cover pre-existing conditions. But we would be talking to the incoming student and their families about the need for that type of coverage. The club isn't usually involved in that. It would be me and or Jane who would be reaching out to the family.
Yeah, I don't know who did it, but it was simple as can be. And
oh, good.
That's partly why I joined Rotary.
Oh, good, good. I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, it should be. I know my own sons who were out as exchange students, and my one son, he got the flu when he was down in Chile, and there was never any question. I think he just showed his card, and that was it. There was nothing, no follow-up, no bill sent to me or anything, so, or to the host family, so it was fine.
Great. Any other questions? Thank you, Jeannie.
Mm-hmm.
Very much. Johnny, could you fill us in? I know you're very active with RILA and also with the screening that we need to do for adults who will be working with youth.
Correct. Thanks, Joyce. So we have a required CORI form. I believe almost everyone on this call has filled one out at one point or another. So for those that have not, I just want to share, if I can ever pull up so on the district website, Rotary7910.org, if you go under youth and scholarships, scroll down, there is a CORI form. When you click on that, it's going to open up, please download and return this form. You click on that, and this is our district CORI form. The required information and the amount of people that don't necessarily listen to it, I always need the last 6 of a social. The last 4 doesn't do anything. But normally they fill out a volunteer, and this is any event that you are involving youth under the age of 18. The adults have to have a CORI check. Now, They fill out anything that's in red is a required item. So I don't necessarily need to know gender, parents' names, but mainly their name, date of birth, the last 6 of their social, and their signature. What this does is allow either myself, and I believe Elliot also has access to the state CORI website. But once you fill out your form, you email it to CORI at Rotary 7910. We get the form, we submit it through the Massachusetts system, and then normally it takes, some of them take a few minutes and some can take up to 10 days. After the 10-day mark is when I contact them directly and I say, what's going on with such and such application? It's been pending for 10 days. But normally if I contact them before the 10-day mark, they will not answer me until they say, you need to wait 10 days. The CORI background check is valid for 1 year. So if you did it for RILA last year, it is valid through, I think, June 20 something of this year. And it covers any event you do with youth. I recommended to our club, everyone submit a CORI once a year, and then that way, whatever event we do with youth, you're covered. And then just remember to, renew it for the following year. If anyone has done a CORI check, we do have the database of all our submissions. You can reach out to us and say, I'd like to know when my CORI expires, and we can let you know when that's going to be. Or you can fill out the form and just say, I want to get this done for the year. We like doing it roughly around RILA because it's the last week of June, and it pretty much gets you through the entire Rotary year up until right before the next Rotary year. So it covers your annual CORI check. Now, a lot of people get new members. My suggestion is if you get a new member to your club, part of their welcoming packet says, hey, here's a CORI form if you don't mind filling it out. That way they're done for the next year and they don't have to worry about having that background check done. My suggestion for clubs would be do a full club roster and just submit it. The only CORI checks that we do not do is educators because they are required to get them for work. So I think all teachers do have a CORI check anyway, and normally they will submit their copy of their CORI check to us. Paula, go for it.
We have an event in December, which I mentioned before, and we use a lot of student volunteers. I know you said everybody should get one, but would that be a really good push to get? It's not like they're going to be alone with, students. It's at a big event and, they're helping us out.
So if the volunteer is over the age of 18, they have to have a CORI check. If they are a legal adult, even though they may be a student, they would have to have a CORI check because they are working with minors. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, the parents are, I was thinking about us having to do it with working with the student volunteers.
So the Rotarians would have to do it. Now, the student volunteers, I don't know. I think they're supposed to do it if they're working with under 18. So I know for Leominster, we've done the CORI checks when we have the high schoolers work with us because we are working with the youth. Whenever you're around youth, whether they are participating with you or attending your event, you're around youth. So we have to make sure we're protecting them. So if you have student volunteers, I would suggest all your Rotarians that are working with them have a CORI check.
Okay, I will suggest that to everybody.
So Paula, my niece then, right, volunteering at winter breakfast with me, should get it. Okay.
Well, yeah, but because of your niece, we should all have it, because of her.
Well, she's over 18, but I mean,
she's over 18. Okay.
Yeah,
All
she's
right.
volunteering with,
Yeah, so I know, for instance, and I'll use RILA, for example, last year, we had several college freshmen who had participated in RILA the year before or the year before that. They had to fill out a CORI check because they were now over 18 and working with the youth.
So I have another follow-up question. So you mentioned you don't get it for educators because they already have one. And I'm pretty sure Ralph has already done multiple CORIs. I had to do a CORI to volunteer at the food bank in town. Typically, does that apply to, do you?
No, it doesn't. They don't carry over from one institution to another.
That's what I thought.
In Brookline, I had to do it for volunteer work that I do with the police. I had to do it again for the library, and I had to do it a third time for the schools. And the third time I said, "Hey, don't you guys talk to each other?" And they said, well, "We don't keep the database, so we just check it off."
The one thing we can do is when we submit an application for a CORI check, it comes back with completed, and then it is reviewed to make sure it's clear. 98% of them say no CORI found, meaning you don't have anything on your record. I love seeing that because it makes it super simple and you're approved. There have been 1 or 2 times where something has popped up and then it is brought up to the DG chain, and it's a case-by-case basis. Like, is this charge or complaint against them something we should be concerned about or not concerned about? And then we have to make that discretionary call, but then the liability is on the district governor making that decision. If it is something where they were charged relatively recently with a crime, especially involving a minor, there's no question about it. It's nope, they cannot volunteer for any youth related item. If it's something completely different, it still will pop up on the CORI. And that's one of those things where it's like, are they a liability to the district or the club participating or not? And that's when we would make that decision. Once I get the CORI, there is a PDF that is attached to your CORI. So I can log into the Massachusetts website and pull your PDF. So for instance, if you are going to be volunteering with another organization, they say, oh, we need to do a CORI check. And you just did one 2 months ago with me. If you reach out to CORI at Rotary7910.org, I can send you your PDF if they will accept that. I accept the educators because they get their CORI and typically they get a copy of that PDF. Just the fact of them saying, oh, I've been CORI'd, I can't accept that. I need to see that you actually have a valid CORI.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions on CORI checks? Awesome. Thanks, Joyce.
Well said. Any other questions at all for this session? We're glad to hear from you, and thank you for attending. I will be sending out the video and the handout set to everybody who was not here, but you get gold stars for being here. Thank you very much. So, very good. Thanks, everybody. And I think we're all set. Good night.
Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you, everyone.
Good
Night, Paula and Ralph.
Paula and Ginny.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.